各位观众们，大家好，久违了，我们又来跟大家见面 JxJ 论坛，与我们的好朋友 Jim 呢伟跟我们一起主持节目。Jim,
Hello, Jimmy. Welcome back.
thank you. It was I need a vacation from my vacation. Taking the kids, it's hard. All three of them are under 11. But as I was telling you, going to Colorado, I was in Boulder the day before the shooting. I was less than a mile away. Could have easily been in that grocery store. But regardless, we're very thankful. And seeing Rocky Mountain National Park, seeing Aspen Mountains, this is a beautiful country. We live in the greatest country in the world. And I am still very, I feel very fortunate to be here. And it's a shame with all this negativity, a lot of shootings, a lot of problems. But aside from that, I really feel that I want to hear your take on our new border crisis that is in the headlines. What is your take on it?
Well, it's definitely a crisis, but it's a created crisis. It doesn't need to happen. I think Mr. Biden and his new Homeland Security Secretary have a purpose in mind, which is to open our borders. The confirmation hearings for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said that explicitly. And in my mind, it's a total misuse of the Office of Homeland Security, the purpose of which is to defend our national security. I think it's a terrible human situation. I think it subjects the United States to all kinds of dangers, and it's totally avoidable. All we have to do is close the border. But the Biden administration simply does not want to do that. And I think is issuing misleading statements about what its intentions are. I cannot figure out what their purpose is other than opening the border. And I don't know why they want to risk all the things that are coming along with it, including the strengthening of multinational cartels, violence in Mexico, the continuing weakening of the Central American countries, which are the source of most, but not all, of the people coming across the border, the erosion of law and public safety along our borders, directly the counties that border, that are aligned along the U.S.-Mexico border, from San Diego to Brownsville. It is awful what is going on there in every stretch of the way. And I find it amusing that President Biden has appointed Vice President Kamala Harris to be in charge of it. Every time she's asked about it, she breaks into laughter. Neither she nor him have visited the border. Many other political leaders have, and they come back uniformly terribly distressed about it, particularly those from California and Texas, but also New Mexico and Arizona. We can get into what they're doing with all these children who have shown up. They've sent them now to all parts of the United States. They have no totally inadequate facilities. President Biden says he wants to unite the country, but every time he gets the chance, he criticizes the policies of the Trump administration. I am just not only totally distressed about it, but I'm baffled about it. I'm absolutely confused about what the upside that anyone, including Mayorkas, Harris, or Biden, sees as the benefits of all of this.
What other solution is there? Is there a better way?
Just say, don't come, and close the border. And everybody that comes gets transported either back to Mexico or to their home country immediately. Exactly what the Trump administration was doing.
But that created the humanitarian crisis where families are being ripped apart.
No, I think the humanitarian crises, I think the Triangle countries, all four major countries in Central America, are failed states. They have a humanitarian crisis within each of their borders. I don't think there's any question about that. But that doesn't mean that the solution is to let anyone and everyone who wants to come to the United States in when we are totally unprepared and totally divided about whether that's the right thing to do. Meanwhile, it's subjecting Mexico to a whole bunch of difficulties as well. One of the things that the Trump administration had done was to strengthen Mexico's southern border and make it more difficult for the Central American migrants to get into Mexico. Those people should stay home. Doing anything less than telling them that we have a rule of law, that we have secure borders, and we have procedures for people entering legally. Anything less than that is inviting them to come and to break laws in Mexico and in the United States. And we are aiding and letting them in is aiding and abetting the breaking of those laws and creating a humanitarian crisis.
Okay, I don't know what to say about that, because I feel that is this confirmed that the Biden administration is letting everyone in?
Well, they say they're not. They say that they're only letting in unaccompanied children, and they are compelling adults that they come in to go back to Mexico. I don't happen to believe that, because if you do believe that, then the Biden administration is breaking up families by letting the children and not the adults come. So I think there's a bunch of double talk, and I don't believe that we're getting the truth through any of the media outlets, but it is one huge mess that is not just confined to the geography of the US-Mexico border. It is now fanning out all across the country.
We know that, like, we agree on a few points. First of all, that these countries are failed states. Mexico is a narco state. The largest customer is the United States of America. Without a customer base, whether you legalize it, tax it, whatever it is, because we cannot stand it, because we're the ones that are consuming. Because of the failed state, because of our narco state, it creates this. We're shutting it down, and we are assuming everyone that's coming here are criminals, that they will break the law. Could you imagine the Native Americans, the only true Americans, telling the European immigrants then to shut down the border and not let them in, when they're just looking for a better life? However, how we do it, how we execute, how do we select? Yes, that is a problem that I don't know how there will ever be a solution. But to say that we need to just shut down the border and let them die, that goes against my Christian faith, goes against our compassion and our empathy. There has to be a better way than to shut down the border completely.
Well, I'm not sure why, if other countries, you're suggesting that everyone that's coming in is basically a political or an economic refugee. That's probably largely, but not totally true. But I don't see why it is our responsibility to solve everybody else's problem. And they have problems. I don't think there's any doubt that they have problems, and do it in a totally chaotic, haphazard way. We absolutely have to put some structure to any of this. And the only way. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Look, it's not about responsibility. if you put it that way, it's about being humanitarian. We're not required to be compassionate. We're not required to have empathy. As Americans, as a developed country, as the largest and most successful country in the world, we have a crisis on our border. I cannot see how or why we would deny the majority of people that are coming here that does need help, because we did create this crisis. I don't want to say we're responsible for it.
Other than Mr. Biden and Mr. Mayorkas saying, come on in, how did we create the crisis?
You know, Venezuela, Mexico, a lot of these failed states, CIA, our ATF, we all had a hand in it, from the gun smuggling to funding different cartels to letting certain people come through. I mean, we wanted to have, in Venezuela, it was us. There's no doubt that was us. And look at what happened. If Iran or Iraq was on our border, they will be coming through too.
Well, I'm sorry,
seek
what?
a better life. If Iran or Iraq was not so far away, if they were on our border, folks from there would try to get into the country too. I don't know, how do you differentiate against a political asylum and economic seeking economic help, or we know the majority of these seekers, these people are running away from terror, from gangs, from war, from bloodshed. We know that. But we cannot, how do we deny all of them because a few of them may be criminals or a few of them may be coming through illegally? I don't know. I mean, this country is built on immigrants. Look, your family came here, how do I say this? The proper way, so did mine. You know, my parents immigrated here with highly educated and with a specialized visa, and then became naturalized. We were fortunate. We won the sperm lottery. We were born into this. We easily could have been born into a South American country or Mexico, and either I decide to join the cartel and kill people and sell drugs, or I want to come here and build a better life for my family. I from a human standpoint, I just don't see why that is a problem. And if you look around, without the laborers, the things that Americans don't want to do, you know how much it will cost for someone to mow your lawn or work in a restaurant or detail your car? Are we willing to absorb that cost where everything triples?
We can go down that avenue of discussion too, Jimmy. I happen to think we should. Okay. Because the cost of not doing that is the erosion of the middle class. In fact, if we keep doing what we're doing and allowing home builders, meatpacking plants, other users of very low-end labor, we will undercut the employment opportunities of our very own citizens. It's already happened in much of manufacturing, okay? And whether they supply that labor located here in the United States through improper immigration, illegal immigration, or we outsource to places like China, Vietnam, and India, and have a race to the bottom that way, we're destroying our middle class, and we are accentuating the divide between the upper and lower classes here. What we need to do is get a hold of our economy and make sure that we have adequate protections for the people who are our citizens. The first responsibility of political leadership is to keep the citizens safe. Safe has all kinds of meanings. It means physically safe from foreign invasion. It means physically safe from crime on the streets, but it also means financially safe, emotionally safe, all those other things as well. We are losing sight of this.
Our elected leaders do have to do that, but to blame the immigrants or to blame policy instead of corporations in a race for the bottom line, for the stock price, have outsourced to India and China, have hired lower wage laborers, all in the name of profit. to blame the immigrants that are taking these jobs.
I'm not blaming the immigrants.
Mhm.
I'm not blaming them at all. I think many of them are acting perfectly rationally. I think they're forced to make horrendous choices, leave everything behind, send their children unaccompanied, pay outrageous fees to the coyotes and the cartels to transport themselves or their children through unknown risks. I mean, those are horrendous. You can only imagine how bad their status quo is when they are faced with those choices and make the choices that they have. I don't blame the immigrants. I blame the corruption. I blame the failed leadership in those other countries, et cetera, et cetera. If it got so bad in some of those countries, I think the U.S. would be forced to go occupy those countries and actually supplant the domestic leadership. I'm not proposing that, but there are times when things get so bad, that's what you may have to do.
That has never ended well for us, ever. When we
Never what?
It has never ended well. It has never ended well for the country that we occupy, that we intervene, or for us, whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. It is very hard to do. No matter how good the intentions are, it is very, very hard because different culture, different. We won't have the time to talk about why it failed. There's so many failed states where we do intervene. Yes, I do agree with you that.
Well, occupying Iraq or Afghanistan was basically a state of war that was unwinnable if we were to go occupy in order to quell domestic abuse.
It is a war zone in Mexico now, Jim. It is a war zone. I actually follow up on that because I have some investments that I follow on. Mexico is truly a failed state. Venezuela, even Brazil.
Venezuela is a failed state as well.
They're done. And compared to 20 years ago when Venezuela was well rich and Hugo Chavez, and it turned out to be this way, it is a shame and it's distressing. And to look at Mexico this last 30 years, 40 years to delve into this chaos. We're at war. These countries are at war. There is no government anymore in Mexico. There's no solution. We're discussing this, but I disagree with you on how to do it, but I cannot disagree with you on the basis that yes, we have a problem there, and they're close to us. They're right there. What do we do? How? I just don't think closing the borders indiscriminately will solve this problem. But they're, like you said, how do we pick? How do we have the manpower? We want small government, but in order to pick and in order to process, it will take months, years. It will take a lot more personnel. And then instead of doing that, what you propose is to at least intervene, not intervene by occupying, but by, how do I say this? I mean, how much aid do we give Mexico every year? Billions of dollars. I mean,
Mexico is our second largest trading partner after Canada.
Yeah, but look at, the DEA, the CIA, the ATF all spend money to try to combat it, and it only got worse. There's so much.
I think there's a larger theme at work here. Mm-hmm. You mentioned desire for smaller government. That's certainly my desire. But
less waste, less bureaucracy,
less regulation, less interference, all those kind of things. Hold that thought and listen to me now, which is in the campaign, the presidential campaign, and many, many, many times since, President Biden has said, we are moving forward with a reset of the American government. Part of the reason for his $1.9 trillion bill a few weeks ago and the new $2.2 trillion infrastructure bill is to go big, have government do far more than it's ever done before. And he's been very clear. And Kamala Harris has been even more clear about the goals for having the government get much more deeply involved in many things. And it's laced in everything that they do. The new infrastructure bill is about 10% infrastructure and about 90% social policy. The 1.9 COVID bill was about 10% COVID and 90% other things. We can go on right down the line. I think it's mischievous spending, and one of the reasons that I believe they're doing it. You deal with economists every day. I deal with economists every day. One of the threats of so much fiscal stimulus turns into so much monetary stimulus because of quantitative easing and the purchasing of all the bonds that are going on is creation of inflation. Many economists say, well, we've been doing this for a long time now and we haven't had any inflation yet. But I believe there's a much larger move afoot. There is no way that the US government can ever repay the level of debt that is incurred, either the debt on the face of it or the unfunded and unrecognized liabilities through Medicare and Social Security, which instead of being $25 trillion approach $100 trillion. There is no way that money is ever going to be repaid. So how do you deal with it? The only cogent way anybody has ever concluded is to create inflation and to devalue the principal of the debt outstanding. And I believe that's what's going on here.
That never ends well. Many weeks ago,
and back to Venezuela, back to Zimbabwe, back to the Weimar Republic in Germany.
Back to what happened to us in the 70s with the oil embargo.
Yeah, and that was a warning. That was a flashing yellow light. And those of us who lived through that have all said, we don't want to go through that again. But right now, we're sowing the seeds of that same kind of destruction, but with much, this is a much larger poker game right now.
Much higher risk.
Much higher risk. And it's not just the United States. Everything that we do is spreading globally, particularly with other industrialized democracies that we trade with, Japan, the European Union in particular.
You're right. For many weeks ago, we talked about it. We're kicking the can down the road to our children. By the time I retire, I don't expect a single dime from Social Security. Every administration, whether it's local all the way up to federal, it is trying to juice the future to fix the present. And one day this bill will come down and there's no recovering from it. And there are other countries that are waiting for this day. China, for one, holds so much debt. We're heading down a road of no return. And this stock market, the fear of inflation is what causes these dips, these corrections. And when it does hit, when the central bank, when the government cannot manipulate anymore, then it will cause panic. Our market would crash. Before, because the US dollar, we could always just print more money. But now, it doesn't work that way. With the rise of Bitcoin, with the rise of China, with the European Union not going with us in lockstep, we are going to have a lot more problems than we did before. The income gap is larger than ever. We mentioned earlier that the diminishing middle class. In every country, developed country, the middle class is what sustains the foundation of the country. And if we cannot deal with that, we're going to have massive problems. And we live in this unstable state. Like I said, I don't want to make it a political issue. I don't know if a different administration is in the White House now, it will solve a lot of these problems. I don't know that. However, I do see your point that there's too much flow in this trillions of dollars that is unaccounted for, and how is it executed? You know, looking at the infrastructure plan you mentioned earlier, what did you say? It was 10% that was on COVID and 10% on actual, the rest is all social issues, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I personally, you know the headlines in the last few weeks about stopping Asian hate, about all these Asian crimes. I don't know if you followed up. Every day there's new headlines. Old lady go to church, getting her head kicked in. Security guards just closing the door. People getting spat on. Even in Houston, business owners.
Mm-hmm.
So, where is this money going to? The social programs? What we're going to educate people to not be racist, to not be ignorant. I look at the George Floyd's trial going up there in Minnesota, hearing the testimony and reading about it. It is very scary how divided our society is, because even without the media, there should be a very clear line of right and wrong, black and white. Mm-hmm. I know that there's always going to be a lot of gray areas in our lives, but there's certain things that should be black and white. But because of media, because of the turbulence for the last few years, this is not the same society that we grew up in. This is not the same anymore with the amount of hatred for each other. I don't know how to go back to that. I don't know, but I do know, as I mentioned earlier, I have heard, on the social media and whatnot, people from countries or totalitarian countries like China or Russia that says that democracy doesn't work anymore because we're standing in place and still moving forward. That totalitarian countries like China has, at least they have a plan, they have a person in charge, everyone is listening. I think it's that's very short-sighted, but I do know that we need to have some changes, and I don't know where that's going to start. I don't know how to fix it, because if the infrastructure bill, if we're going to be in debt for many generations. Mm-hmm. Am I right? We're going to be in debt for generations. And going back to do you have a better solution to fix this, Jim?
Well, for one, I would not have done either of those bills. Okay, what those bills represent, there's an old saying: if you're in a hole, quit digging. These two bills are a power shovel to take us down further and further faster. One is to spend money that we don't have and that we can no longer borrow. So what are we doing? We're printing our own money through the Federal Reserve, okay? And we're eroding our own institutions as we do all of this. The government is invading all aspects of the private sector in order to do it, changing labor laws all along the way. There's a parallel commitment going on in the Labor Department to try to have the federal government declare any state law that creates right to work illegal under federal law. So a place like Texas will immediately open the way to total unionization of everything. We now have the federal laws, H.R. 1, to try to change what is effectively a constitutional mandate that states handle their own election laws. H.R. 1 would change all of that, okay? There is a grand plan out there that frightens many of us who are paying attention. So what to do? I think what's going to happen is the Biden administration is going to move too far, too fast, stumble along the way on things like the border crisis, like having some of these children be taught by teachers who are getting paid to be effectively on strike because of the COVID, and they're teaching some of these new unaccompanied minors rather than teaching their own students because the schools are closed, particularly in Southern California. And I think what's going to happen is in a year and a half, we will have another election. And I think the Senate and the House will shift into Republican hands and stop all of this. It will happen. The balance of power, the checks and balances will hold things. Now, there's going to be a lot of damage done in between, and you can argue with whether that will help unite the country or create further divides. I really don't know what the psychology is going to be, but we must stop this very harmful economic behavior. Are there going to be consequences? Yeah, a lot of the air will come out of the stock market.
Yeah.
Okay, because as I've said to you in several of our prior programs, Jimmy, I think one of the reasons the stock market continues to go up is the government keeps pumping in air, okay, in so many different ways. You start pulling that back and it has no place to go but down because the fundamentals aren't really changing. Yes, earnings of some companies are going up, but that's on a narrower and narrower base of the number of companies. More and more companies are getting weaker and weaker. And you can look at different measurements of strength versus weakness, but that's effectively what's going on.
It's distressing.
There have been some studies that I've seen recently. I haven't seen the studies. I've seen the reports about the studies that show that entrepreneurship is way down. New business formations. I mean, we talked about America being the land of immigrants. Of course it is. It's also the land of law, the rule of law, but it's also employment created through entrepreneurship and opportunity.
Yeah.
When people are unable or unwilling to have that bottom up kind of economic strength, that's very frightening. And the other thing that's very frightening is demography. The reason that the American population is growing is because of immigration. Our base population is not growing.
No.
And you just look at Europe, you look at Japan, some other developed countries, and they're actually below replacement even with immigration. In the short term, that means that there are fewer and fewer people to shoulder the increasing debt.
And the elderly, the need to care for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so who's going to care for them? And it's going to be more and more expensive for the people who need the care.
Like I said, when you mentioned Japan, that's a perfect example because I'm very familiar with Japan. You're absolutely right. It's upside down. In a few years, in a few decades, they will have more people over the age of 65 than under 40, where each young person would be responsible for 2 or 3 different elderly based on their structure. And that's not sustainable. Japan is not welcoming to immigrants. Japan is not open to immigrants, unlike us. So that is a mistake that we could avoid. And that's a good thing that immigrants are. But by closing the border and not allowing more immigrants, I don't know how both could work.
I have heard a variation of that story many, many times in the Chinese population. Because of China's one-child policy, you have a woman and a man get married. They have one child. That one child has 6 parents. They have their father and mother. Then they have the grandparents on both sides. Yeah. So they have 2, 4, 6 parents. Now, wind the clock forward 20 years. When that young child, instead of being 3 or 5 years old, is 23 or 25, he has to support, he or she, and it's mostly a he, has to support all 6, okay? The kid grew up being spoiled to death by 6 people doting on him, but then the whole thing flips in terms of responsibility.
This is a huge underlying social issue in China right now. about this generation of young people that is unappreciative. You know why they're not only spoiled? That is 6 parents and grandparents, and each of them have their residence to give them. So this child might not have to work ever because the increase in real estate value in China is unprecedented. So basically, a house for $100,000 home 10, 20 years ago is worth a couple million now if you're in one of the big cities. So yes,
he'll inherit 6 of them.
Yeah. But I mean, they're enjoying it now. But even in my generation, 30, 40-year-olds, they're enjoying that. But they don't understand when their parents get older or their grandparents get older, all this is going to be used back. But this is a problem in China, and they do recognize that's going to be a problem. There's no way of fixing it. Singapore and Japan, a lot of these developed countries, they encourage you to have babies. They give you bonuses, tens of thousands of dollars if you're a citizen and you're having more kids. Isn't that crazy? In our country, we're hoping some of our folks don't have so many kids and apply for welfare or social programs because it's taxing their system, while other countries are hoping to have.
Somebody once asked me what I thought about those policies, and I said, well, I'm happy to practice.
Jim, every time I talk to you, we learn something new. I appreciate you. It's never enough time. We shall continue this discussion next week. It is very distressing. Even though the market closed at all-time high, I know this is not sustainable. You know it's not sustainable.
No, these issues will still be with us next week. I guarantee it.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you, Jim.
Got it. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.